If you have a fantasy draft coming up, this video will help you because today we're breaking down 5 tight ends that you should be drafting because as of right now, it looks like everyone is taking the wrong tight ends in drafts. For the past 6 years, we've been helping people win their leagues on this channel, and I plan to do the same in this video for you. Now let's start the conversation with these elite tight ends. You're going to see people calling these first couple of rounds right here, Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta, who often go off the board in the 2nd or 3rd round. Even Trey McBride, all the way down to Mark Andrews. These guys who go in the first 4 rounds of drafts are your quote-unquote elite tight ends, and they're all great tight ends. Depending on how early you want to take one, it's up to you. I wouldn't really be reaching too high into the 2nd and 4th round because here's the deal. If you come down here to the number 5 tight end in fantasy drafts, 52nd overall, so round 5 right now, is Dalton Keke. And in my opinion, Mr. Dalton Keke of the Buffalo Bills has just as good of an upside and should be in that elite tier as those other 4 names I mentioned. But those other guys go before Keke over 90% of the time in drafts. And as you can see right here, Keke was the Bills' 1st round pick last year. All the top receivers were off the board, from your Zay Flowers, your Quentin Johnston, your Jackson Sitton, the Jigbas, and the Bills needed a pass catcher, so they took Keke because he was a great pass catcher in college. And this translated to his rookie season, where even in a part-time role, while splitting time with Dawson Knox, he finished 8th in tight end targets, 91 overall targets. It was the year of the top tight ends, and the finish on the year for Dalton Keke was the tight end 14, which in my opinion is highly impressive for a rookie, splitting time, competing with guys like Stefon Diggs, and for a guy who only scored 2 touchdowns. If that number is closer to 4 or 5, which is what most guys see on a 90-plus target share or overall volume, he's probably going to finish as a top 10 tight end as a rookie. But the part that I really want to look at is from week 6 on, because that's when Dawson Knox went down with injury last year, and from there on out, Keke averaged 11.2 points per game and 6.7 targets per game in those contests without Dawson Knox. And that usage and production was both top 10 and borderline top 5 last season. And keep in mind, this was while competing with Stefon Diggs, with Gabe Davis, but now those guys are gone. And as you can see right here, the vacated targets for this season, Buffalo has the 2nd most in the NFL with 173. You scroll over to the receiving yards, by far the 2nd most in the NFL. The Chargers are first. They lost basically their entire offense. And then the Bills are here to try to replace Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis. And I do believe, look, there's been players added. We're going to talk about them in a second. But I do believe that Keke is going to see a large role entering year 2. And here's the exact team changes. And the Bills probably had the most team changes of anybody this offseason. This is a part of my fantasy blueprint. You can check it out with over 15,000 other people. Link down below if you're interested. But look at this right here. The subtraction side, Gabe Davis is gone. Stefon Diggs is gone. Heck, even Trent Sherfield and Deontay Hardy. I mean, these are like 4 of their top 6 receivers from last season are gone, and instead they've been replaced by a 2nd round receiver in Keon Coleman in the NFL draft, wide receiver veteran Curtis Samuel, and then also Matt Collins, MVS, some of these other names. Some of those guys like Curtis Samuel and MVS are currently banged up, but there has been a lot of turnover, but no elite player was taken or brought in to replace a Stefon Diggs type talent. The direct competition you're going to see for Keke is in the wide receiver room. In 2nd round pick, Keon Coleman, I think he's a nice pick. He goes in like the 10th round of drafts right now. I think he's completely fine, but I don't think he's going to be somebody who can earn 150 targets as a rookie. If you get 125 target season, that's great. Khalil Shakur, probably a mostly slot receiver for this team, doesn't really have #1 upside in my opinion based on his film. And Curtis Samuel, already dealing with an injury, the 28-year-old veteran, is a talented player, reconnecting now with Joe Brady, his former coach during their time in Carolina. They had success there, but he's injured entering the year, and his limitations downfield are there when they're not as much there like we saw last year for Dalton Keke. And here is that injury I was talking about. He's considered week to week. This is as of August 19th. The season starts 2 weeks after this, so there's a decent chance that he's either not 100% for week 1 or misses a week or 2, which gives even more upside in those specific weeks, like a week 1 or a week 2, to a Dalton Keke, because his target share would increase even more and get a nice hot start to the season, build that chemistry stronger with Josh Allen. Now, the biggest threat, in my opinion, to Dalton Keke is if Dawson Knox, who is a solid NFL tight end in his own right, continues to see a large role on this team, because then the playing time for Keke, or at least overall snaps, might reduce. But the thing that we have going for us is that Dawson Knox, although he's a talented tight end, he's not the same type of pass catcher. I mean, he was a 3rd round pick, you can see right here, compared to a 1st round talent as Dalton Keke. Not the type of same raw pass catcher as a Dalton Keke, which gives us more opportunities for Knox to come off the field, or both guys to play. As you can see here, Knox, best reception season, about 49. You might see 70+ receptions this year for a Dalton Keke. They just need their playmakers on the field. They lost some playmakers this offseason. I would consider James Cook a playmaker. After that, they're hoping it's probably going to be Dalton Keke on this offense. And here's the real stat that we have to watch. This is courtesy of Player Profiler. The route participation, 82% is pretty good. 83% in an offense like this. That was 13th most in the NFL. That's definitely enough to finish as a top 5 to top 10 tight end. But if we can get this number closer to 85 to 90%, then we're looking at Dalton Keke as potentially being the #1 overall tight end. And that's not even factoring in the fact that he scored just 2 touchdowns last year. That will naturally come up as well. Lots of upside here for a team that needs to find a playmaker in the middle of the field. enter Dalton Keke. Now, the next spot I want to look at is a place where I'm really surprised that people are doing this in terms of how they're looking at their drafts. If we look down in this range right here, your tight end number 8 is Evan Ingram. Your tight end at number 9 is Jake Ferguson. These guys at this range in the drafts, based on the data right now, people are taking them about 50-50. But I'm pretty surprised by this. I don't know how people are not taking Evan Ingram way more than Jake Ferguson, especially considering he finished as the number 2 tight end in all of fantasy last year. I mean, Ingram clearly outperformed, in my opinion, and based on the stats you can see as well, a guy like a Jake Ferguson, and basically a ton of guys that go ahead of him as well. You can see Ingram right here ends up going out there and having the most targets, 143, 8.5 targets per game. He also led the NFL in terms of tight ends in receptions. If we scroll down there, with 114 receptions, 6.7 receptions per game. Keep in mind, this is while competing with a guy like Calvin Ridley, who had 136 targets. He's gone. Zay Jones, who when he was in the games was averaging 4, 5, 6 targets. He's gone. I mean, heck, if we even go back and look at this, a guy like George Kittle is going, what, 15 picks before, if we see right here, 15 picks before Evan Ingram in drafts, even though George Kittle has much tougher competition. If we pull it up right here, you obviously know his target competition. As of this recording, Brandon Ayuk is still there. It seems like there's a pretty good chance he's going to end up there. He's now participating, although he's at practice, not participating, but he's out there. There's Deebo Samuel. There's Ricky Pearsall, who's a first-round pick. We don't even know what his role is going to be, but probably going to be a little bit better than the wide receiver 3 last year on this team, and Juwan Jennings in terms of just a pass-catching ability. And then there's also Christian McCaffrey on this team. Kittle has a lot of competition that Evan Ingram just doesn't anymore. But the opposite is true for Evan Ingram, who I mentioned those guys like Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones are gone. Now, Christian Kirk is still there. Talented receiver, goes in the 7th round of your drafts. That's fine. Brian Thomas is still there as a rookie. Talented receiver as well. I like him because he goes in round 11 of drafts. I think he's probably like around 8 or around 9 talent overall, but he is a raw rookie. We'll see what he can do. And Gabe Davis comes over from the Buffalo Bills. I'm not really too concerned about him taking a lot of targets. A guy who can never top 100 targets in 4 seasons with one Josh Allen in that Bills offense, despite playing next to Stephon Diggs. And Evan Ingram is a guy who's shown now since his time with Jacksonville that he can win in both the short, intermediate, and deep parts of the field. And last year, he ranked 2nd in yards after the catch amongst tight ends. So you're getting a do-it-all tight end. This is a guy in Evan Ingram who, like we said, wins after the catch, can earn targets, operate downfield efficiently, and now he's going to be in an offense in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence, who's bound for a breakout, by the way, that's still going to probably throw at a top 10 rate. They don't have a good secondary either, so they're going to have to throw to keep up in games, and that's where Ingram in the middle of the field becomes a security blanket. So I'm just surprised that Jake Ferguson, as the 81st overall player, the tight end 9, about 50% of the time is being taken ahead of Evan Ingram in drafts, because look, I don't think Jake Ferguson is a terrible player by any means. We could break it down right now. He's actually a good player. Now, this is the photo on Player Profiler. It's pretty interesting, but you can see here, he's only had a 2-year career, and really last year was the year he got to break out due to an injury the season before that in a camp competition. You can see right here, had 102 targets last season. This is pretty good, and heading into this year in the Cowboys offense, not a lot has changed, so we could probably expect him to see around another 100+ targets. But the issue for Ferguson is last year when he actually saw a larger role, he started to become not as efficient. I mean, 15th in yards per route run, that's fine. His yards after the catch ability was a little bit so-so. Sometimes it was great, some games it wasn't. And the big thing is, I don't think he has 8.5 target per game upside like Evan Ingram does. I think he probably has like 6 targets per game upside, which is a pretty big difference. So I believe that right now Evan Ingram deserves more attention because he has arguably, if not the best role, one of the best roles in all of football. Now, before we keep going to these middle round tight ends that I think one will win your leagues and one definitely won't, I want to let you know about the fantasy blueprint. It's a simple question that I'm asking all of you this offseason. Do you want to win your fantasy league? You can see it right up here. Do you want to win your fantasy league? Well, if so, if this sounds like you, well, then you just click this button right here to get access to our fantasy blueprint this year. And here's the thing. It's risk-free if you sign up through one of our 2 partners below. Now, what does this mean, Sal? Well, it means that you'll get access to my fantasy blueprint, my draft guide that I use and over 15,000 other people use to help you with your draft, and then help you every single week of the season as well. I'll send you a daily waiver wire tiers, rankings, projections, matchups, whatever it might be to help you win that matchup. And it's risk-free because if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll refund your one-time payment when you sign up through one of our partners. That's just $10. I can't put them both up, so $10 for the entire season. And here's the thing. You don't make your playoffs, no questions asked. You get it right back. So if you would like to increase your chances of winning your league like it says right here and join 15,000 other people currently using my blueprint, you can click the link in the description below or scan right here this lovely QR code on the screen. Now, those middle round tight ends I was talking about were right here. In George Kittle, who goes 62nd overall in drafts, and Kyle Pitts, who goes 63rd overall in drafts. Right now, Kittle is being taken ahead of Pitts about 55, nearly 60% of the time. And look, this is interesting because I think it should be the other way around. And I know that might shock you because Kittle has had great a track record of success in the big name, and Kyle Pitts, for the most part, has let people down. Look, we mentioned this earlier, so I won't go too deep into it, but the competition is obviously there. In Deebo Samuel, in Brandon Ayuk, in Christian McCaffrey, in a first-round pick, Ricky Pearsall, for whatever extent he gets on the field after looking really good and getting healthier in camp right now. And not to mention, George Kittle is an incredible blocker, and for a team who doesn't have the best offensive line in football, nowhere near it these days, they're probably going to keep him in, even if it's an extra 2-3 snaps a game to block. That's going to affect his overall target upside because he's not running as many routes. He's not running an extra, 30-40 routes on the year. But entering 2024, I believe that Kyle Pitts has more target upside and thus more more overall fantasy upside. Because Pitts finally has a quality quarterback in Kirk Cousins, who last year led the NFL in passing yards and was top 10 in efficiency before going down with an injury. And over Cousins' last 19 games, during his time in Minnesota, those last 19 games, his primary tight end was a man named TJ Hawkinson. And in these games together, Hawkinson averaged 13.8 fantasy points per game and 8.3 targets per game, which both of those metrics were top 5 amongst tight ends. And Hawkinson did this despite competing with the best receiver in the NFL in Justin Jefferson. Pitts won't have to do that this year in Atlanta. And now Cousins' primary tight end will be Kyle Pitts, who's basically a wide receiver. He's extremely athletic for his size. You can see right here, 99th percentile speed at the position for his size. Ran a 4.49 40 when he came out. Was one of the most athletic tight ends we've ever seen entering the NFL. And then he enters the NFL and he actually has a good rookie season. People forget how good it was. He finished second overall in tight end yards in NFL history. And you can see that production right here, 1,026 yards. So then the sky was the limit. In the next 2 seasons, he got drafted higher in fantasy, and here was the concern. In 2022, he ends up dealing with an injury. He only plays in 10 games. He only has 28 receptions because of that. And in 2023, he plays in all 17 games, but he admitted that he was injured during this season, only has 89 targets where people were taking him. They were hoping for the Sam Laporta season from last year of 120 plus targets, but here's the deal. Not only was he injured, but he was playing on an offense that the past 2 seasons, including the year before that when he played in 10 games, the Atlanta Falcons ranked 31st in passes per game, and then last year we're still a bottom 5 rate in passes per game in neutral situations. I mean, this Falcons team under Arthur Smith was running at the 2nd highest rate in the NFL when they were trailing by 7 or more points. That's not going to be the case this year in Atlanta with new play caller Zach Robinson. Robinson is a guy who comes over from the Rams, who are notorious for using 3 wide receiver sets and passing the ball at a high clip in neutral situations, and especially when they're trailing. And that's exactly what we've seen so far in the preseason on limited samples from the starters being out there. That's what we're getting right now. And honestly, it's not even the starters, it's like the preseason starters, because the Falcons aren't playing their guys all that much, or even some of their backups. But either way, we're seeing a lot of 3 wide receiver sets and heavy pass play calling from Zach Robinson. And oh yeah, by the way, Kyle Pitts in his 3 seasons in the NFL, as you can see right here, he has 1 receiving touchdown, 2 receiving touchdowns, and 3 receiving touchdowns. So if we can just get 6 total touchdowns in his NFL career, I think that there's a chance that he could see 6 or more alone this year based on how much this team is going to pass the ball and utilize Pitts in the red zone. If he gets 5+ touchdowns, he's easily paying off this price in my opinion, assuming he stays healthy. Now let's start to get to the later rounds of your drafts. I'm looking at like round 11 and 12, where Pat Freiermuth goes off the board right now as the tight end 15. Cole Kmet goes as the tight end 16. These guys are being taken about 50% of the time right now. Sometimes Kmet's being taken before Freiermuth. And look, here's the deal. I'm not like over the moon about Pat Freiermuth, but there's no way you should be drafting Cole Kmet over him. For starters, Cole Kmet's competition is much more difficult. He's still going to compete with DJ Moore like he did last year, but oh yeah, now Keenan Allen is there. Now top 10 pick Rome Odunze is there. Now there's another tight end in his own receiving core, and Gerald Everett, a veteran who comes over from the Chargers and is a great athletic player after the catch, also there. Like last season, Cole Kmet was averaging about 5.5 targets per game. You can see right here, he ranked top 10 in targets. He had the same amount of targets as a Dalton Keke. This is pretty good usage. That's what he was doing last season though, and that was in an offense that didn't pass the ball a ton. They're going to pass more this year. So some people might say, oh, he's now going to earn more targets per game. No, he has more competition. And in their second preseason game, and this is courtesy of Nate Yonke and PFF right here, you can see that Cole Kmet, he played the first 3 snaps of the game with the starters. Okay, he started and played that. He's the clear starter. But then Gerald Everett stayed on for the next drive or 2 and played 6 snaps. So what we're seeing so far through the first 2 preseason games for this team is that right now the tight ends are splitting the overall starter usage. And if Kmet is not a full-time tight end, that's even more concerning. But Pat Freiermuth doesn't have to worry about this. He's his team's clear starting tight end on a team that right now just does not have a lot of passing game options. And according to the camp reports, as you can see right here, that Alex Cazzaro says, and it's quoted by 32 beat writers, not that it's shocking to hear this, but Pat Freiermuth is having a solid camp. He would go on to say that the fact that there's no clear number 2 wide receiver is benefiting Pat Freiermuth. And that makes a lot of sense. You have George Pickens out there, who he in his own right has his own concerns about winning in the middle of the field. And then after that right now, you're not really dealing with much. We'll pull up the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers at this point, and it looks like Van Jefferson's the number 2 receiver. It looks like Calvin Austin will be the starting slot receiver based on their usage. This is a big downgrade from what you had last year in Deontay Johnson in terms of guys who have an ability to earn targets in the middle to short parts of the field. That's where one Pat Freiermuth is going to come in and soak up more targets in theory. Now I know what you might be thinking, but Sal, isn't Pat Freiermuth coming off of the worst season of his 3-year NFL career? The answer would be yes, but that this needs more context, because last year he started the season with an undisclosed injury, but then more importantly in week 4 he strained his hamstring, an injury that for him was a little bit more of a grade 2 strain. This is something that's probably closer to a 4 to 6 week recovery. That's what it took him. He missed a bunch of weeks. He was on the injury report for a bunch of weeks after that. This is something that midseason can really hurt a receiving tight end. And it also doesn't help that his quarterbacks in Mason Rudolph and Kenny Pickett were arguably the worst quarterback combo in the league. This year, it doesn't get much better, but Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, especially Russell Wilson, I would much rather have than those guys. Again, it's not a massive upgrade, but even if it's like a 10 to 15% upgrade, that means a little bit more accurate targets for Pat Freiermuth. And this is a guy who we've been pointing out some of the other tight ends, like a Kyle Pitts, like a Dalton Keke, who could see more touchdowns this year. Pat Freiermuth, his last 2 seasons, just 2 receiving touchdowns. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers will have a little bit more of an efficient offense this year. They don't have Matt Canada as an offensive coordinator start this year. Instead, they'll have Arthur Smith, who will be more run first, but also loves to utilize his tight ends in creative ways. Now, the big thing we need to see out of Pat Freiermuth this year is for this to go up. His route participation was 77% last year, 20th amongst tight ends. We need this number closer to 85%. And if we look at the preseason, courtesy of PFF and Nate Yonke, the second preseason game, Pat Freiermuth only had 11 of the 20 starter snaps. You can see right here, playing about 50% of the snaps, ran a route. This number right here, ran a route on 8 of a potential 13 dropbacks. So he was only out there running a route on like 60% of the route participation. What that means is basically he ran a route when they pass the ball just 60% of the time. The rest of the time he was either blocking or not on the field. Now that's obviously not great usage, but it's also better than what we saw out of Cole Kmet in his preseason game, and the competition for Pat Freiermuth being basically just George Pickens is nowhere near the same competition as Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, and Gerald Everett. And if you didn't pick up on it, that's the competition that Cole Kmet has to deal with. Take Pat Freiermuth instead in those parts of your drafts. Now, before we get on to some later round tight ends who honestly could actually win you your leagues, over 65% of you are not subscribed to this YouTube channel. I know I've been saying it, but my goal is to get closer to 50% throughout the NFL season and by week 1. So hit that subscribe button. You might be watching on a TV, might be watching on a tablet. It takes literally just 2 seconds, but it really helps this channel go a long way and helps more people see my work, which obviously helps everything. So I appreciate you a ton. Hit the subscribe button. Now, those later round tight ends, I want to talk about it right here. Ben Sinnott is a Washington Commanders rookie tight end, goes as the tight end 21 off the board. And then Noah Fant, all the way down here, goes as the 24th tight end off the board. He's being taken after the rookie over 80% of the time in drafts right now, which is honestly absolutely crazy. This is the craziest one to me right now. All right, dear Lord, let's talk about this. Look, Ben Sinnott was a 2nd round pick. He's just 22 years old. He comes from Kansas State. I think he's a talented player. For a 250-pound tight end, he's pretty damn athletic. You can see all the metrics on Player Profiler. The higher these are to 100 percentile, the better. 98th percentile burst, 95th percentile agility, 96th percentile catch radius, well above average speed at 76th percentile. All of these numbers basically just let you know that he's very athletic, has a high catch radius. He's a good tight end. That's why he was taken in round 2. And not only that, but he can actually put up production. As you see right here, a college tight end to have 49 receptions, it doesn't sound like a lot in the NFL. Anything above like 30 for a college tight end is great. He had 49, and he earned an 18% target share on his team in college last year. If you're anything above like 13 to 14% in college, you're really good. Again, that's why he went in the 2nd round. But the problem is he landed on an offense that, for the most part, they're going to have a run-first quarterback in Jaden Daniels, so not really supporting a lot of weapons, and Zach Ertz, the veteran, is there. And I know Zach Ertz is one of like the 3 or 4 oldest tight ends in the NFL, but he's been productive when healthy the last few seasons, and now he's repaired up with his old coach during their time in Arizona in Cliff Kingsbury. And that's important because in his 2 seasons with Cliff Kingsbury, we saw Zach Ertz finish as a top 10 tight end, number 10 tight end, and number 6 tight end, and this is while only having 4 and 5 receiving touchdowns, meaning he was just earning a lot of targets, receptions, and overall receiving yards. I think he's still going to be the number 1 tight end to start the season. So you're drafting a backup who's also a rookie, which we know historically it's harder for rookies to have that breakout potential. You're drafting this type of a guy over Noah Fant. And in my opinion, that's a mistake. Now I know what you might be thinking. Sal, didn't Noah Fant finish terribly last year? And you would scroll down to it and you would say, yeah, he had the worst season of his career, finishing as the tight end 36 overall, not scoring a single receiving touchdowns. But I would add to you that there's a lot more context that goes into this because this is a completely different offense now for Seattle with completely different personnel that Fant's gonna have to compete with. More specifically for that personnel, if I pull up the team changes tracker in the fantasy blueprint right here, Colby Parkinson is gone. He's gone to the Rams. Will Dissly is gone as well. The 2 tight ends that were rotating in with Noah Fant are gone. And so is Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, the play caller that liked to rotate his tight ends. Instead, now there's no competition for Noah Fant with a new play caller in Ryan Grubb. And Ryan Grubb comes over from college in Washington, where he led a top 5 offense last year that heavily relied on 3 wide receiver sets with 1 primary tight end receiving option and an offense that passed the ball a lot, especially downfield. So all of these things benefit Fant. He has less competition and a coach who will just stick to using 1 tight end primarily as a pass catcher. And oh yeah, Fant's an athletic guy. And I know I'm saying Fant, I've heard him say it both ways, whatever you want to say, that's completely fine. Here's the big thing though that you want to point at. 56% route participation, 30th amongst tight ends last year, only running 19 routes per game, 24th amongst tight ends. There's a good chance that both of these numbers hit the top 10 this year. I wouldn't be shocked if it hit the top 5, although that would be a little bit bold, but there's a good chance he becomes a top 10 usage tight end, which means in my opinion, more times than not, he's at least a top 10 overall fantasy tight end, but he goes outside the top 20 2023. Now, I want to throw one more bonus name in here because we just brought him up, and that's Colby Parkinson, the new Rams tight end, because this is a guy that I believe currently, he just signed a new contract with the Rams. The second highest amount of money they gave a free agent. They gave the most money to Jonah Jackson, the guard that came over from Detroit. They gave him $51 million. Then they gave Colby Parkinson, as you can see right here, $22.5 million on a 3-year deal. Their second highest paid tight end was this man, Colby Parkinson, for a reason. And the reason they gave Parkinson all that money is to be their #1 tight end, because Tyler Higbee tore his ACL in the playoffs, and he's not going to be back until at the very earliest, people are saying right now, end of October, probably closer to November. So if he's not going to play for the first like 6 to 8 to 10 weeks of the season, Parkinson is this team's #1 tight end. And that's exactly what we've seen in the preseason, because Parkinson has been resting with the starters as the tight end 1. Now, Parkinson brings some versatility in pass catching to this Rams tight end room. I would say that Hunter Long is another talented tight end, but Parkinson has more experience, a guy who can win during his time in Seattle, not only in the short to intermediate parts of the field, but Seattle would also put him on the outside, not just in the slot, not just on the line, on the outside, and he would be able to win there as well. So this is a guy who was able to have a 48 reception season in college, and we said anything over 30 is great, and now he goes as the number 33 tight end off the board. I think there's some other decent names down here. We talked about Zach Ertz earlier. Okay. We talked about Juwan Johnson, who's returning from an injury in camp right now. He looks pretty good as well. I think this group of guys down here, tight end 31, 32, 33, I would much rather have than this group of guys right here. Tight end 26, 27, 28. You can even go higher, tight end 25. So I think there's some nice super late rounds if you're in a team that, or a league that has like 14 plus teams in it, or 20 plus rounds, you need a second tight end. I think those are some nice options, especially Colby Parkinson. So these are 5 tight ends you should be targeting in drafts and not making the mistake of taking the other guys around them. But if you want to see the 5 running backs you should be drafting right now based on all the news that we have before your fantasy league begins, well, check out this lovely video right here. All you do is you just tap that video, it takes you to it, you watch it, and who knows, it might be your favorite video ever, so be sure to check it out.